The Florida's Women in Energy Leadership Forum was launched to inform, inspire, motivate diverse talent to join the energy workforce by intentional recognition of current female energy leaders who contribute to growing Florida's economy and the purposeful sharing of their professional journeys. We are creating opportunity. Join me each week as we meet new leaders in energy and listen to their important roles in an industry that is vital to the country's future. Good morning and welcome. So this morning, we're with Kelley Burk, who's the director of the Office of Energy in the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Kelley, I always have to say that slow. It's a mouthful. It's a mouthful. Let's start with a description of what your office does, Kelley.
Sure, and thank you for having me back, Lila. It's always a pleasure to get to chat with you and to be on this forum. So yeah, it is a mouthful when you're talking about where the Office of Energy is housed. But our office, in the Office of Energy, we're the legislatively designated state energy policy development office within Florida. So what that means is that we work in a lot of different spaces within energy, but we evaluate energy related studies and analysis. We get stakeholder input. We promote and advocate for the development and use of renewable energy, energy efficiency, alternative fuels, and alternative vehicle technologies. We use available state and federal funds to develop grant programs that promote those areas that I just mentioned. We also produce an annual report each year that talks about what our office has done, as well as the current state of energy within the state. And we also serve as the state clearinghouse for energy information. So we have quite a breadth of what we do.
Yes, you do. Now, I remember, Kelley, when the office was created, there was a bit, controversy is too strong of a word, but certainly confusion around the differences between your roles and responsibilities and the Florida Public Service Commission as it relates to energy and energy policy. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on what that distinction is?
Sure. So I will say, to start out, the Public Service Commission is a regulatory agency. The Office of Energy has no regulatory authority at all. So we're pure policy and programs. So a lot of what we do every year is we will make recommendations to the legislature on policy and programs. We'll also, when any energy bills come through the legislature, we'll do bill analysis on those bills. We're also the entity that, when there is funding available from the Department of Energy for grants, we either get some of that through regular formula funding that we can then pass through to different entities within the state, or we apply for competitive grants with different partners. So we're able to partners with businesses, with utilities, with local communities, with universities to pursue federal grants.
And certainly Florida has benefited from the utilities' ability to access those grants. I remember it was your office, if I'm not mistaken, that administered the solar rebate grants,
Yes.
the CNG grants, the compressed natural gas grants that went to promoting CNG vehicles at the time, right? Or CNG
Yes.
fuel in vehicles. So you said, like, I can't imagine you're ever bored. So let's dig into, let's just kind of break down for our viewers and listeners two functions. So like the last time you and I talked, we were talking about some of those rebate programs and the solar industry. This time, I want to focus on two areas specifically: the energy equity study that you've been working on that I know is near completion, and second, an update on your promotion of electric vehicles on behalf of the state. So let's start with the energy equity study. Following that, when Commissioner Freed announced that study, as I recall, one of the components she was looking at was whether there was a disproportionate share of a burden to the underserved or low-income communities in this state. Is that correct? I mean, that was just one component, I know.
Yes, you are
And
correct in that.
so my question to you is, now that you've had, opportunity to look at the data, uh, just give us maybe a high level overview of what you have found and what we should expect in the final copy of the study.
Well, I will say I don't think there will be any surprises in the study. I think that you will see some disparities, as we know are there. You'll also see we looked at a wide breadth of things, not just um, the energy efficiency or burden component, but we also looked at transportation aspects. We looked at
Mhm.
building codes. We looked at programs within the state and where the state can maybe bolster some. So I think you'll see a lot of data that I think will be useful, but I don't think it will be surprising because we do know that there are disparities within a lot of our communities. It might surprise you where some of those disparities are, where you might not have thought that they were. But I think overall, it's a really good baseline study for us as we are starting to move into looking at energy equity across the board in all the different sectors that energy touches, and how we can make improvements for our low to moderate income citizens' lives.
Yeah, and just to drill down a little bit more on what you said with regard to the other components, as I recall, some of your questions for which you sought input related to access to electric vehicle chargers, access and affordability with regard to electric vehicles, period. Um, the degree to which we might be understanding as a state energy efficiency, or whether
Mhm.
energy efficiency measures can be improved. Is that Will we see more of that information in the report as well?
Yes, you will. We covered those. And I will say, just for everyone watching who participated in this process, which I greatly appreciate all of the input that we received. We're also looking at this as a starting point. So this is our baseline. I think one of the things we realized is that there are a couple of areas that we can tease out a little bit more and mine some more data on and get a little bit more perspective on than what we were able to do in this initial study. So I think also too, folks can expect to see us um, pursuing a little bit more in depth some of these different areas where we have seen the disparities and the inequities.
Okay. And so we've mentioned data, we've mentioned the report. We are going to include where our audience can find the report shortly, but let's talk about how you collected the data.
Mhm.
Frankly, your process overall. Walk us through. So she makes the announcement, Commissioner Freed makes the announcement. This is an important issue for her, and she launched um, the study. What were those steps that you undertook?
So once we launched the study, what we did was we, of course, put together our scope of work, what we were looking for. A lot of that was based on conversations that we had had previously with a lot of stakeholders. Several of us also sit on national organization groups that look at energy equity. And so we had gathered some information from there. We put out a request for proposals. We got a lot of great responses and bids. We ended up going with the Balmoral group. From there, we had conversations with them about what we were looking for, what the scope of work actually meant, what we were expecting in the final product. And from there, Balmoral took it and had a lot of one-on-one interviews with different agencies, utilities, stakeholders, efficiency organizations, solar organizations, transportation organizations, and getting some of that feedback and data. They also then we did a lot of stakeholder workshops that were open to the public, and we spread those out around the state to try to get as much input as we could, because we understand too that different areas in the state are going to have different issues or different perspectives than others, and so we wanted to make sure we captured that. We also did a virtual workshop so that if they couldn't attend in person, you could attend virtually and provide your comments. Once we received all those comments from the workshops and then from the various stakeholders that the one-on-ones were with, we put together a draft report, and then we released that for public comment as well, and we got a lot of great feedback from that as well. So from those comments and our final comments, we're in the final stages of putting together the final report, which we're hoping to release within the next week or two. And so I think that we wanted to make sure that this process was very open. So at any point, we were letting folks know what we were doing. We were letting them know that if they had comments or feedback, they could email us at any time. They could email Balmoral anytime. And I think that that was very, very vital in getting the data that we had, and using all of that to get to our final report.
And were the electric and natural gas companies part of that process, providing data, including for you the different programs that they have available? I'm using energy efficiency, for example.
Yes, Balmoral reached out to all of them, was able also to from websites and research to pull that information of what programs were available.
So throughout the state, different workshops, multiple geographies. Obviously, that means your different populations, right? Mm-hmm. Depending on where in the state you were. Can you go ahead and share with us, though, did you find pockets in the state where clearly there are some opportunities to do a better job as it relates to affordability concerns, location of facilities, education with regard to conservation or efficiencies, or real-time pricing? Were there definite pockets of opportunity?
Yes, there were, and you'll see that in the report and what comes out. But
so you're not going to give us any breaking news?
I'm not going to give any breaking news yet.
Oh, okay, all right. We were going to claim you heard it here first, folks. Yes. Well, we've mentioned the report so much, and let's give access to at least the draft study report. What's your website and where? Well, so when is your final report due, Kelley?
Like I said, we're going through the final edits of the report now, so we're hoping that it will be released within the next week or so. So right around the corner, you can see our web address scrolling down below us, and you can find it there once it's released. We will also we have a web server list, a contact list, so we will email it out to them with the web link to let them know that it's available. So if you're on our stakeholder list, you will get that email when it comes out. If you are not, you can email us at the office, and we'll be happy to put you on there so that you can get updates not only about the equity study, but about other programs and activities that the office is participating in.
You have been, I must just stop here and commend you, because you are very accessible and you are very transparent and inclusive in all of your processes, not just your work on the energy equity report, but just as long as I've known you, Kelley, and that is so appreciated. I think that view is shared certainly with everyone that I've spoken to about you and your office and your work. If you want access to the draft report, that website is where you get it. And certainly you can reach out to Kelley directly. And we hope to see the final report in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
All right. So you won't give me a heads up on what some of your findings are, but I'm going to put words in your mouth. So you've made some recognition that there are pockets of opportunity. Let's assume, just hypothetically, let's assume that I'm right and one or two components you think create some opportunities. That tells me that we should expect some policy recommendations that come out of your office. So what does that look like from a process perspective?
Well, I think what you'll see is when the report does come out, there are some policy recommendations. That was one of the things that we were adamant about that the final report have. I think what you look at in the next steps processes, we will take that and look at how where it is appropriate for our office to do that, where we incorporate those into our processes and how we develop programs or looking at the funding that we may be pursuing that's coming down from the federal government. I think there is also the opportunity to really look across all of the different state agencies that may have a hand or a fingerprint in energy to see where we can work together in these processes, because I think, if we're talking about transportation, I think we need to include the Department of Transportation in that conversation as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to work together as state entities, as well as with our local governments, as well as with grassroots communities, to really impact change and to look at how we can put some of these policies and programs into place that will have a direct benefit to those communities.
And let me just stop here and remind our viewers, you are more than welcome to send in your questions. Happy to ask a question and encourage Kelley to shed more light onto the report, but please do post your questions on the forum, the platform that you are using to view the show today. So, Kelley, with regard to what you said, reminded me that we probably should emphasize that whatever policy recommendations you're working on or contemplating, you really are talking about a statewide effort.
Mhm.
So, whatever whatever comes out of this, you're really going to work with the municipal electric companies, the investor-owned utilities. It's not just one part of the sector. Am I right in that regard?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is when you're looking at an issue of energy equity, I think it's an all hands on deck um, type of situation, to where if we're going to have the full impact, if we're going to actually implement change, everyone has to be at the table. So not just state agencies, not just local governments, not just utilities, but also your solar industry, your energy efficiency industry, and really have a conversation about what's going on, where can we work together, because I think all of us have a little piece of the puzzle, and if we're going to solve that puzzle, we have to bring that piece and lay it down and put it together and work together to impact the change. So it can't just be one agency doing all the work. It's got to be everyone together. um,
What about your, non-traditional groups that can play a role? And only non-traditional because it's not their involvement wouldn't be day to day,
mhm,
the provision of energy, but your faith-based organizations, your nonprofits that do have access to money
mhm.
and may be able to contribute in a community effort to provide additional opportunity. Is there outreach in that regard? Because I think that's part of being
Mhm.
inclusive as well.
And I completely agree with you. And yes, our office is doing some of that outreach. We had actually started pre-COVID, and then COVID happened, so that, I think put everybody back a little bit. But we've started to reach out not just to faith-based communities, but to the grassroots communities, to community action organizations, because it's not just potential funding that they might bring, it's the fact that they have the trust and the access to the communities that we're trying to reach. And if we can partner with them to help educate, to help learn what communities actually need, because I think that's a big key too, is that they have to be at the table when we're also looking at designing programs from a state level, so that we can make sure that the programs are meeting their needs, and that we're meeting them where they are at, not just what we as a state think
Mhm.
they need. And so I think we all kind of have to go back to the drawing board of how we were doing things, you know, even 3, 4 years ago, and rethink how we are going to address the needs of our low to moderate income communities in a way that they will take advantage of those programs, that they will understand those programs, and how do we bridge that gap that's been there for so long between us and these communities?
Yeah. And how much of your work, well, let me ask it differently. How much was lack of communication an issue for what I'm loosely calling the pockets of opportunity? So, to the degree you found equity concerns, how much of that was related to lack of communication or the way we communicate? I tease, right? Everyone who knows
Hmm.
me, I tease. English is my second language. So when I'm not quick to understand something, I always, say, look, English is my second language. But for purposes of this question, it's not a joke, right? So in
Right.
parts of Florida, maybe it's a predominantly Hispanic community. So one of the things, as you know, on the Public Service Commission, they're very good about translating their
Hmm.
special bulletins or their notices, and companies do the same. That's a mode of communication that is critical when you are presenting to that community. Can we do a better job in things like that, Kelly?
Yes, we can. Absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important that when we look at this, we look at engaging those boots on the ground organizations that are working within these communities every day, so that we can understand more. And then we can also understand too what is the best way to communicate the message. It's not always going to be like a flyer in email. It's got to be something else. Is it hosting a community barbecue? Is it hosting a community pizza party or a listen and learn or something like that? And that's where I think we again have to kind of erase the board of what we thought was the best way to communicate and really understand each community is different, and how do we reach that community? And yes, it's going to take a little more time and effort, but at the end of the day, I think that time and effort will reap so many benefits as we're moving forward in trying to address the issues of energy inequity.
Yeah, and as a value add, I think help whatever organization it is, whether it's a municipal or investor owned, or it doesn't matter. It helps gain trust, I think,
Right.
between the companies and their consumers. So we've got our first question from the audience, Kelly. Does your report cover environmental justice?
It does a little bit. I think we talk about it, but that wasn't the primary focus of our report. It was more on the energy side of things, not the environmental justice side of things. But we do mention it and we do talk about it because they are interconnected, but it's not going to be primary um, environmental justice.
So we've got another question. I know it's very soon after passage to ask, but what opportunities do you see for Florida's energy sector and your office in the Inflation Reduction Act? Great question.
So the Inflation Reduction Act actually is going to have a lot of benefits for the state of Florida. So in that Reduction Act, there are two sections. One relates to a Hope for Homes program, which will look at efficiency upgrades for low to moderate income homes. The amount that they have given to that is $4.3 billion, I believe. So it will be broken down, and the funding for that program will come through the state energy office. So we will be the ones who administer that program. They also have another program that I believe is around 4.2 billion, something like that, that will be for energy efficiency appliance rebates. And again, our office will administer that program. So I think there is a lot in the Inflation Reduction Act that will be beneficial to us. That's another reason too why we started on this study, because we had seen in the Biden administration, he did the Justice 40 executive order, which said that where possible, 40% of federal funds needs to go to environmental justice and low to moderate income
Mhm.
communities to address energy issues. And so with that, a lot of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was the right before the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of funding in there too that can come down, that will come directly to us as a state. Some will come directly to communities itself. There's a lot of competitive grants within that. And so I think us too, looking at that Justice 40 initiative, we were like, we need to have a baseline of what's going on in our state so that we can understand it. And so I think the report helps us with that as well, because when we're looking at applying for funds, we're able to use the report and the data in there to support why we are asking for the funds for our communities.
When would that drawdown begin? So you need to present an application for the funding, or will there be an automatic drawdown and then an application process on your end for anyone who wants to take advantage of any of the programs that are offered?
So for the programs under the Inflation Reduction Act, those will be a direct allocation to us as the state. So I'm not sure how the Department of Energy is going to do it yet, but they're going to use a formula that we use for our funding every year from them. So when they set that up, when they do the formula, we'll draw down the funds, and then we will set up a program for people to apply to. We're in the process now, especially with the Hope for Homes program, because if you read the language, it can get a little bit complicated. So the National Association of State Energy Officials, NASEO, has set up a task force to start looking at how we can design programs around these funds. Myself from Florida, California, New York, and Minnesota are chairing that task force.
Oh, wonderful.
So we'll be having a lot of conversations with other states about looking at ways to implement it. It's also one of those things too where I believe we'll be reaching out to the industry to get their feedback and their response for those. With the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, a lot of that funding is starting to flow and come down. So we'll see what that time frame is, but I can assure you our office is closely paying attention to every time a grant announcement comes out to see if it's something that would be beneficial to the state. We try to pass that on to anyone that we think would be interested in it, if it's not for a state to apply, but for a university or a community.
Mhm.
So I think one of the most important things with both the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act is communication, and having that open communication between us and everyone in the state. So I know they flashed up my email. I would advise all of you watching, if you want more information, because we have spent a lot of time going through all of these acts and sent on a lot of calls about these, please don't hesitate to email me. We're always happy to have a conversation with you to explain where we are, what's available, where we can work together. Because I think that's going to be so important, is that communication and collaboration, because there's going to be a lot of dollars that are flowing, and we want to make sure that we are capitalizing on that in our state and bringing as much down as we can through whichever mechanism that we need to, or any entity that we need to. So we're also willing to support programs or projects that communities and universities are looking at. So just reach out to us. If we can be of support, then that's what we're also here to do.
And so something you said has triggered a thought regarding collaboration. Could a utility company, a municipal, partner with a vendor, a provider, an educational institution to put a project forward for your consideration that promotes energy efficiency as well as job creation? I mean, is this the opportunity to take a holistic view of how we do things and come in with an application that involves all of those entities together? So, it may honestly, it could be a collaboration between a municipal and investor-owned utility
Mhm.
and an educational institution for a renewable energy or an alternative fuel. Wouldn't this be the time to do that?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
And not just through, again, our funding that's coming through our office, but through a lot of the mechanisms that are in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA,
Yeah.
because there are a lot of opportunities there. And it's really, I think, just parsing through and looking at it and figuring out where it makes sense to apply for things. But I do think that this is the time where collaboration amongst all of us in the state where it makes sense would be very prudent,
Hmm.
because I think we can all be helpful and beneficial to each other as we're pursuing these competitive grant funds.
And just the last question on this, because I know we need to switch to EVs. The is the process going to be a first come first serve? Or is it too early to tell? Are you ranking projects and applications?
It's too early to tell, because a lot of these funds, too, I will say we have to wait for the Department of Energy to give us guidance on how funds can and cannot be used. And so once we have that guidance, it makes it a little bit easier for us to then put a program together. I will say, too, we also have to be very careful about who we talk to in putting programs together, because we don't want to preclude anybody from or exclude anybody from applying to the grant when it's released. But I think we have a good understanding of kind of what's going on in the state, and I think we're going to look at doing some more listening sessions, especially on specific topics, as we're seeing some of these competitive funding opportunities happen, and then from there we'll go. But the funding that comes directly to us, we will then program out based upon what our administration is looking at, based upon what we know needs are, and then we'll open that up for a competitive process.
And just to tie your work on the energy equity study to this, just to close that circle, will there be any component of your evaluation related to those pockets of opportunity or equity and affordability issues, or a minority procurement component of the application process?
I believe that there will, probably not in all of the grants, but some there will. I think too, some of what we're seeing with the data, we may develop special grants for some of those communities just to apply to. So it's really going to be, I think, a mix of everything that you said, as we're looking at putting out these funds, because again, as I said, these are federal funds that are coming to us, so we're going to have to abide by what the guidance is that DOE gives to us. And so, but we do want to make sure that we are dispersing these funds equitably across the state and to communities that may not be getting direct allocations, because we will have some communities that are going to get direct allocations under the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program from DOE. And so some of the smaller communities will not, and that will be where the Office of Energy will step into that gap and fill that gap to provide them funding for programs as well. Because I also think that that's a role that we play as the Office of Energy when we're looking at the landscape and we're looking at programs that are out there. We always ask ourselves, where can we step into a gap? Where can we help communities that need it, that aren't getting the same type of revenue or have access to the grant programs that some of our larger cities and counties do. So we really try to play that role and to fill that gap, to make sure that we're addressing the needs of our rural and low income communities.
Good. So, we could talk about this the whole time,
yes.
right? So you have to promise me, and you're always so good about this, you have to promise to come back and we'll update, right? We'll update on the final report and the application process. But let's spend the next few minutes we have left on EVs.
Okay.
So I'm sure you saw last week the announcement Duke Energy is partnering with Ford on further implementation and launching of a joint EV program and charging stations. Those kinds of announcements, of course, we're seeing them across the country, right? That's helpful in terms of furtherance of your promoting EVs. Is that, you would agree, right?
Oh yeah, I think so. And I always find it intriguing because could you have imagined 5 years ago Ford partnering with a utility on EV infrastructure? It's one of those things, I always say energy is always such an interesting field because it's you never get 2 days that are the same. And this is an example of that. Could you have ever imagined that we'd be talking about Duke and Ford partnering?
No, no, and what a combination of, yeah, transportation and energy
Hmm.
where isn't transportation, isn't it true? It's still the number one
Hmm.
carbon emission
Yes.
polluter. So it's just such a win-win. Um, but are the charging station construction implementation, is that schedule meeting, keeping up with, the availability of electric vehicles? How are we doing in that regard, Kelly?
I think we're okay at this point. I think as we start to see the increase in electric vehicles, which what's projected between now and 2030 and 2050, that infrastructure is going to become more important. I think that's why you're seeing such a large investment under the Infrastructure and Jobs Act in charging infrastructure. So we have the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, or actual vehicle. I'm sorry, National Electric Vehicle Investment, I believe it is,
Mhm.
program, which the Department of Transportation is heading up. And in that NEVI program, the state's receiving $198 million for charging stations. Now, those charging stations have to go along our state highway systems or alternative fuel vehicle corridors. They have to be about 50 miles apart, no more than 1 mile away from the exit or the interchange. So you're seeing a lot of investment happening, and that's just coming through the state. There's even more that's in a competitive grant that anyone could apply for to put in EV infrastructure. So I think what you're seeing is in the next 5 years, which is how long that program and that funding will last, you will see a lot more popping up along so that we have a good infrastructure within the state.
And are you seeing the prices of electric vehicles come down? I'm thinking about where we started in this discussion with equity. Uh, does everyone have access to an EV?
I don't think at this juncture everyone has access to an EV. I still think that for some of our low moderate income, the price is still too high to make that investment. I know there's been a lot of talk about the secondary market and the used car market to see if that's a possibility and how you can make those accessible. But I also think too, when you're talking about EV transportation and low to moderate income, you're not just talking about passenger vehicles. Now you have to look at your transportation fleet. So you're seeing a lot of investment in our cities and counties in EV buses for public transportation as well as for schools, and school buses and moving kids around. So I think that that's another way that you look at EVs and equity because if they're riding in a cleaner bus and they're not breathing in the diesel emissions, it makes for a healthier person and a healthier community and a healthier city and county.
Yeah, great point. Great point. So, Kelly is going to continue that conversation on her work with
Mhm.
regard to the EV policies in the state and also the partnership you have with the Florida Department of Transportation at our annual forum, November 9th through the 11th. Kelly is on one of those panels discussing her work on EVs. Kelly, this is the part of the program where we get a little personal, right? Oh, there it is. Yeah, re-energized. We're gonna talk all things re-energized. And Kelly, just a shameless plug, every Florida CEO or president is on this year's program. I don't think
That's
I
awesome.
shared that with you. So it's going to be a phenomenal program. And I hope that you all can join us in Tampa on November 9th. This is the part of the program where we get a little personal. So remind me where you went to school. We've already talked about, actually, no, that was before the show. Tell me what your degree was in so that we can inform, inspire, and motivate our next generation of workforce talent.
Sure. So I earned a BA in history from Florida State University.
What was
Um,
that? History?
in
History?
history, yes. And then I got my master's in public policy from Pepperdine University a couple years after that. So that was
And
my
what
background.
did you think you were going to do with that?
Honestly, I thought when I got my master's in public policy, I was planning on going to DC
Mhm.
and to try to get a job there. And I was waylaid by like a snowstorm, and so I ended up back in Florida and working at the Department of Education, honestly, in their external affairs office. And did that for a few years, and then ended up working on a campaign, a gubernatorial campaign. When that candidate won, we took office, and then in 2007, I joined the Office of Energy. Actually, in 2007, I joined the Governor's Action Team on Energy and Climate Change.
Yeah, that's where you and I first
Um,
met.
yes, and so I worked as a staffer for that, and then the Office of Energy, as it is now, was created in
Mhm.
2008. And so I came into this office and I did a lot of transportation policy work. And then the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act hit, which sent $175 million through our office. So everyone in our office became a grant manager. And that's where I learned I do not like to manage grants.
No. No.
And so every opportunity that I could, I tried to get back into the policy space. And then in 2011, when we got moved to the because we were in the governor's office in 2011, when we got moved to the Department of Agriculture, the commissioner at the time wanted to focus more on policy. So I was able to move back into policy. So I became the policy administrator and then the deputy director. And then in 2015, I became director.
A wonderful career. Cindy Clemens said, "Go Knowles." Yes. FSU. Um, so Kelley, majoring in history, I emphasize that because really I always try to impress upon our college students today that it all matters. It all
Hmm.
matters, and we have to stay flexible in our choice of careers. You are applying everything you've learned in your next opportunity.
Correct.
And certainly, your master's in public policy is relevant to everything that you've done. But what great history you're making now on the energy side. I mean, as long as I've known you, you have touched every single new aspect
Mhm.
of energy, whether it was the CNG work or the solar work and energy efficiency, and now EV, and to work on something as important as energy equity. You're making history in your career, and I really applaud all of your efforts. What advice would you give that second year college student if she's interested in a career in energy?
The advice I would give them would be to do your research. There are so many career options within energy, from the policy space to working with a utility, even to working with energy efficiency organizations or solar organizations. To do your research and then to reach out and to get a hold of someone and have a conversation with them. Look at internships. There might be 3 or 4 areas of energy that you're interested in. Give them all a try to find out which one you like. And I would say too, don't be in a rush to get to your goal of where you want to be at the end of your career. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, enjoy that process, because you learn, as you said, so much from the process. And every time you try something, you can figure out if it works for you or it doesn't. For instance, for grants, that did not work for me. And I was okay with that because I knew that that's not the way my brain functioned. That's not what I wanted to do. That wasn't my passion. But when you try certain things, you get to decide, like you said, after I'm done trying this, I'm going to take this with me and that I'm going to leave behind when I move on from
Mhm.
here. And when you do that, you form your building blocks so that when you find that one job that you're really passionate about, it becomes not a job, but something that you're excited to do. And when you're excited to do something, every day is just a great day. Like, I enjoy every day coming into my office. Yes, there are challenges. Yes, there are tough days, but every day is different and I get to learn something new. And it's what I'm passionate about. And I'd also say too, once you find your passion, become an expert at it. Learn everything you can about it, every aspect, because what happens is when you do that, then you're the go-to for people. And you really set yourself up to be in a position to where people know that they can come to you and they can talk to you, and you'll give them good information. So that's what I would say. Just don't be in a rush. Try things out, because there are so many aspects in so many different jobs within the energy sector that are all fantastic and great, but may not be a good fit. May look good on
Mhm.
paper, but may not be a good fit. But don't be in a rush. Experience it all, and learn from your journey, because that's just the best thing you can do.
And I see it. I see it in you. You are such a rock star, and that passion for your work really shows. Kelley, I
Thank you.
appreciate you so much. I appreciate your leadership, and thank you, thank you, thank you for being with us, and for being with us in November, and for leading by example. Thank you, Kelley. We'll
Thank you,
see.
Lila. I always appreciate the opportunity
Thank you.
to chat with you and to have these conversations. It's really it helps us too. So I
Mhm.
appreciate
Good.
that. And I will
Good.
say too, to everyone out there watching, again, my email has been scrolling. Please do not hesitate to email us, to reach out if there's a subject that you're interested in, if there is information that you're looking for on the Infrastructure Act, on the Investment Jobs Act. Please reach out to us. We're here to be a resource. We're here to help. And I look forward to the forum in November. And if anyone has not been, you should go, because you learn so much, and the panels and the speakers that Lila puts together and her team puts together are just so amazing. I never walk away from that without, one, feeling energized, no pun intended, but two, also having gained some knowledge and some insight that I didn't have before. And I just think that that's fantastic. So thank
Thank
you
you, Kelley.
for
Thank
hosting the
you.
forum.
Thank you. Thank you. Join us next week when we'll be with Kathy Chambers, who is the head of economic development for Florida Power and Light. We'll see you next week. Kelley, thank you again. Bye.
Thank you.